Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our webinar, AWS and NetApp webinar. Today we'll discuss about the power of the data, how to unlock the power of the data, accelerating industrial transformation with NetApp and AWS. My name is Daniel Gomez. I'm a go-to-market store specialist for the energy vertical. I cover global accounts. I joined AWS in June 2022. And before joining AWS, I spent 12 years with Dell Technologies, most of them covering the energy industry as a solutions architect, energy field director, and as a storage SME for energy. And I've been through the to the IT industry for 25 years, spending the last 15 years working directly with energy companies. And now we'll pass to Russ, who will introduce himself now.
Great, thanks, Daniel. Yeah, my name's Russ Sagard. I am the business development lead for the energy sector here at NetApp. My background, I've been in the oil and gas industry for quite a long time now, coming up on 38 years, so 7 years with NetApp. But my background is actually starting off with Shell in the exploration department. I spent quite a number of years, about 15 years with Schlumberger, oilfield services, had some time at GE Digital, where I spent a lot more of my efforts really kind of focused on the midstream and downstream, the industrial part of it. So quite an extensive background in the whole broad range of energy. Today, really what we're going to be doing is we're going to be spending some time around what are these transformations and what kind of technologies are really coming into play. So these are things that both AWS and NetApp are combining together to come up with solutions on a cloud connected data fabric, and how that actually was now being implemented by a wide variety of different customers. So we're going to go through the benefits of it. We're going to go a little bit over the some of the technologies, and then give you some individual use cases. So I'm just going to get into the agenda. So kind of as I was saying, we were kind of going over a little bit around the current state of the marketplace, what we have been observing across a wide range of customers, everything from the midstream pipeline operations, tank farms, going into refining, petrochemical, some examples even from the renewable energies now. So we're going to go through, kind of how this connected data fabric now extending from the on-premise environment into cloud is really kind of helping customers transform their business. So we're going to get into a little bit more of the examples of what this connected fabric actually looks like, and then I will turn it back over into Daniel, who will describe a little bit more specifics about what is the AWS and NetApp solution. And then we're going to get into more of the Q&A side of things around, well, how do you get started? So a simple observation that has been shown up by several different analysts who have been looking at the industry is this is an industry that is not short on data. We have plenty of data. It's more of the issue around, well, is it siloed? Is it really getting to all the stakeholders who really need to have access to this data? Is it getting there in a proper time frame? So it's not so much that the data isn't used, it's maybe isn't being used by everyone who actually has an interest in that data. And is it really getting into all the different stakeholders, and is it really being effectively used across your organization? When we take a look at the various challenges that we're seeing and observing across various customers, it's this siloed data, I think, is really cutting into the lack of visibility. Our industry has really been in place now with this kind of IoT sensor data monitoring, has been around for decades. And I think we've done a very good job when it comes into taking a look at do we have responsive analytics around condition monitoring of operations of the equipment on the production lines themselves. But it's this visibility as it kind of moves up in through the the rest of the organization, comparing plant to plant. What happens now? Do I have that same visibility across all the different stakeholders? And I think that's the part that we can really help with this solution we're going to be talking about today. The other issue that we get into is, with the modernization of our analytics, we're incorporating a lot more of the machine learning, digital twin, the AI kind of, operations now. So can we do more with that data by applying different forms of analytics? And again, it's going to be different types of analytics that are of interest to the different stakeholders across the organization. So we're going to be looking at ways of modernizing the environment to deploy those analytics maybe more effectively. and to get more value from that data. We do see that it really does affect the root causation analysis. So when we're looking exclusively at that on-premise environment, just the condition of individual pieces of equipment, when there is a problem or an identified problem, there can be a slow response when it comes across to who else do I need to notify, especially when that, who else do I need to notify extends into external vendors and partners. Are they really able to leverage, the same information in a timely fashion to resolve problems faster? We're also finding that, with the analytics that are being deployed, these are quite often legacy analytics. And now we're combining in with all these new sources of analytics, these new modern types. And it's really kind of around, well, I have more to contend with. I still have all of that mounting data. The cost of the legacy environment, I think, is mounting. So we want to take a look at, well, can things like a cloud connected environment, can it help offset some of these rising costs? Can I use that cloud infrastructure to be there when I need it? Can it scale when I require it? And I think that's when we're going to see some real advantages of a cloud connected world. And then we get into this whole concept then of, that lack of scalability. A lot of these new analytics and these new data lakes that are associated to it really do have a requirement for a lot of infrastructure. Now, there's a tremendous amount of data value that can be extracted, but it's a matter of, do I want to start building out that IT infrastructure in every one of my plant operations to really run these new modern analytics? Or is there benefits that I can really be leveraged by having more of a cloud connected centralized service? So when we look at the digital maturity curve, in this case, maybe not so much a curve, but steps, everybody on this call is at some point on the curve. Now, depending upon your level of maturity, you might still be at a point where, number one, where you have essentially all of your, equipment being monitored for condition. And there's that trend analysis that shows me when I'm in a normal state and a non-normal state and what I should be doing, as far as, taking action when something goes wrong. When we start moving up the curve, things start to change a little bit. When we get into step 2, we really now have more of a connected enterprise view and not necessarily a production line or a plant view. In other words, this is getting into the points where, I'm now comparing and contrasting. Am I using similar types of equipment, similar operations? Do I have similar maintenance and best practices for operations across my enterprise? Are all of my plants operating at the same levels of efficiency? And so that's kind of that next level of maturity when we get into the enterprise. Now, sometimes people are doing this with private networks, but more we're seeing that this is now expanding into the cloud world. Then when we get into, levels 3 and 4, this is where our operations are really starting to transform. This is something that is relatively new, and it's really based upon the forms of analytics that are being run against that IoT sensor operational data. You'll see the mention in 3 of, AI, machine learning, or deep learning. This kind of gets into the concept of, well, I've seen this behavior before. I want to learn from it. I want to start now getting into predictions as to, well, if I've seen this vibration, heat problem, I've seen these issues before, what is my knowledge database? What is my knowledge capture? What is it telling me around what should I be doing proactively? Then level 4 is much more advanced. This gets into now, well, I can start to adapt, my environment around, well, if I am going to be planning, some kind of a shutdown, or if there's changes in commodity prices, there are things to do with customer contracts. Now I become a lot more flexible and adaptive in how I actually run and manage my operation. So I'm no longer just kind of responding to, what my equipment is telling me, but I'm really getting into more of an operational connected world where all the stakeholders are informed, everybody's taking decisions, and we're running these types of advanced analytics to really optimize my business. So where AWS and NetApp start to factor in here is in these kind of 3 pillars. So within, one of the easiest ways of looking at this is my migration. Can we just take some of my on-premise environments and just lift and shift straight into cloud. Now, this works extremely well for certain types of operations. One of the examples I'll kind of throw out here is things like, remote pipeline compressor stations. I've got small amounts of IT infrastructure monitoring, some kind of a remote operation. In some cases, it's more of an issue and more of a risk to have these isolated, remote IT environments than it is to just lift and shift it straight into cloud. One of the things that we have an awareness on is the fact that, a lot of people, especially in large scale environments like refining and petrochemical, have data governance policies where that data is still going to remain on premise. But now it's more of that middle thing where I'm extending it into a cloud-based service. Again, getting into this concept now where we have more of an operational or an enterprise look and not so much isolated on my production line or into my individual plant or my remote compressor station. So the concept of extending into the cloud means that I'm still running, a lot of that, localized fast loop processes on premise. But now I've also got this added value of having a replicated and physically connected world now extending in that data fabric into the cloud. And now I'm able to have that broader enterprise viewpoint. I'm engaging with external vendors and partners. All my stakeholders have that same kind of connected view. We're taking operational decisions in real time together. So there's a huge benefit, and we'll get into a lot more of the examples around having this convergence between my on-premise environment and also my cloud world.
It is a great way, Russell, to connect silos that are isolated in different plants, connecting them and replicating all the data to a central data lake in the cloud.
Yeah, and that leads very nicely into the whole modernization side of things, is that this concept of a centralized service. If I'm going to be running a data lake and I'm taking essentially my operational best practices, from what I have, and I'm going to create these new advanced AI analytics and giving it kind of like that knowledge sharing across the organization, setting up infrastructure in every individual plant and then trying to replicate that is very difficult. But if you go into a centralized service, the modernization, these new analytics, the new forms of data management is just easier, and it's also a lot more cost effective when we're looking at that modernization running into a connected fabric in the cloud. And we'll explore that a lot more here in the next couple of examples. So we're going to switch now a little bit into, well, what do these advanced analytics look like? Now, maybe it's not so much the generative AI, not trolling the internet like everybody else is thinking about, but it's really more to do with the RAG-based approach, where I'm in control of what is going into that knowledge repository, that the answers and that information that comes back is really kind of more of an assisted decision-making process. So I'm in control. I mean, I don't have to worry about any type of external hacks onto my data, and all the information and the recommendations coming back are trusted. So let's take a look at who these decision makers are. And this kind of gets my point around the level of maturity across the organization. We've always had, on premise, we have the process control engineers. They are the people who are responsible for that fast loop analysis, really taking a look at the condition of all my equipment, my production lines. That's been in place for quite some time. Then we get up into, well, that same kind of operational information is also being leveraged by somebody like the plant manager. So they're looking at it from a slightly different angle. It's not individual pieces of equipment or production or anything along that line, but it's really now more around higher level analytics and business objectives, production optimization, maybe around sustainability. It could be around supply chain connectivity. That same operational data is integral in those kind of reporting and analytics as well. It's just used in a different context. A different context yet again, and where we're starting to see this, extension into the cloud and around that cloud connectivity is around that enterprise viewpoint and, how we can really leverage, full enterprise optimization, bringing all plants and equipment operations up to the same level of standards. It is the direct incorporation of external vendors and partners, that knowledge sharing and inclusion of my vendors who are maybe conducting maintenance, who have the inventory. They're also actively engaged in this process. So this is the same thing where we get, well, that same data has to be used across the entire connected data fabric. So let's take a look at, well, what kind of information is now going into these analytics? Now, on the far left, you've got your classic vibration, temperature, pressure, all that IoT sensor data, which typically goes into your data historian. So that has been pretty much in place for some time. So we do have to take a look at a database. If we're going to be looking at a connected fabric into cloud, one of our key starting points obviously is a database. But now we get into some of these other things. Now we get into spectral analysis, the video, acoustics. We're getting into other forms of information, which is also going into these knowledge repositories. Data which is being used in order to train the analytics. Well, that now starts to coming into file, object. It starts looking at these different types of information, still starting off on my production lines in my plant. But if I want to use the concept of a data lake in the cloud for centralized utilization of building these analytic models and then a push service back out into all my various plant operations, we need to be able to have a connected fabric which really incorporates a viewpoint into all the forms of information which are happening on my production lines. And I want to have that same environment connecting up into cloud. And this is kind of where our ONTAP operating system now is exactly the same environment across all these different levels of the data fabric itself. From the production line through to cloud, it's the same capabilities, same handling of multi-protocols, the same experience that you're going to have within the AWS cloud as well as back on premise. One of the things I'll point out here is you see SAP. So a lot of what has happened in the oil and gas industry already is almost everybody is SAP based, for their ERP systems. Well, that is already at the enterprise level. So if I'm looking at, bringing together this operational information along with, what is maybe inventory, vendor management, financials, if I'm trying to bring that decision-making environment together, well, that naturally lends itself into cloud. So I think if you've already gone to this point of bringing SAP into cloud, we still have to have this connection between the different environments. And that's one of those other forms of that new data lake, that centralization that Daniel was just talking about, that really lends itself very nicely into the AWS cloud. When we take a look at what does the rest of this infrastructure might look like, is within NetApp, on premise, we have various ranges of different performance storage, different cost levels, different tiering capabilities, converged infrastructure. Again, all of the equipment that we provide as a storage provider is running that same operating system now that is available within the AWS cloud. So even if you had some type of private cloud extensions for some certain remote locations, but now it's that concept where I can really take a look at the entire data fabric, edge core cloud, really operating with the same capabilities. This is where we have a common viewpoint, managing all the on-prem as well as the cloud environment really together as one. Cost optimization, bringing all these different services together. So with that, we're going to look now at just a few examples. What does this actually look like in reality when it comes into the midstream, downstream, the retail sector potentially, and even extending into renewables? Because almost all oil and gas companies now with a commitment into sustainability goals being achieved by different timeframes, renewables are now coming into play. So this is another graphic really to kind of show what might be happening from an on-prem environment through to a connected cloud service. So I've tried to describe, on the left-hand side, kind of, typical tank farms. It could be compressor stations. It could be, fracking towers. It could be all sorts of different things that environment which is monitored by, again, vibration, temperature, pressure, all those things that you've been doing on so long, that is still in play. So you're still collecting that data from an on-premise environment. But now we get into, well, where should these analytics be built? That data lake. Where is it most cost effective? Where is it easiest for me to use an extension to build out the infrastructure, to build these analytics, to run them and update them when I need to? It's more cost effective, and it's also easier access when that is done in the cloud. So this is kind of one of those examples where that connected data fabric kind of moves across from edge to core to cloud, but we're seeing more and more from our customers now who are trying to run these new advanced analytics with the new data lakes, really utilizing cloud-based services as that centralized control point, as opposed to building out more infrastructure, isolated infrastructure, siloed information decision taking. Moving it back on premise makes more sense to be done in the cloud. Now, just to kind of show the general flexibility of this environment, we're going to go through some of these other different use cases. And this really kind of now gets into an extension of, well, how else is it applicable? So in the last example, that was very much a classic, time series. I'm running, some advanced analytics, trend analysis. I'm running a digital twin on my IoT sensor data. But what about some of these new things? Things like using video. Now, whether this is a spectrometry, spectral analysis, it could be mass balance of what's happening on my pipeline. There's all sorts of kind of remote field types of operations. But a lot of this data now is going into video, acoustics, it's other forms of information. Imagery, it could be video, again, file, object. Well, I still want to incorporate that same information now in advanced analytics. And again, those data lakes are more naturally built up into the AWS cloud. So again, it's needing that same kind of a protocol capability to be able to extend the operations up to the cloud level. Another example, something very, very different, energy retail. So before we had pretty much just a simple point of sale, the single point of sale was really going to be, held in the gas stations, but now we're getting into, customer behavioral analysis as we're deploying more of these EV charging stations. It's, video being used to, monitor the behavior of the customer. How long does the vehicle still sit there after the charging has been done? Things like worker health and safety around, filling stations. Same kind of concepts. It's building up these analytics, but the information starts off in the field operations, or in this case, retail, and it moves into cloud in order to be able to be that centralized service. So when you're an integrated oil company and you're moving, looking for some type of an extended data fabric architecture, a centralized service can be for field operations, retail, it can extend into pipelines, it can extend into refineries, but centralization really now gives us major advantages of being able to move a lot of that IT infrastructure away from these siloed, offsite these locations into a centralized service. This also holds true, this is my last example, really around, what's happening now in the renewable energy. Again, whether it's wind farm, tank farms, distributed energy resources, it's that same type of concept of condition monitoring. So I still have, IoT sensor information, and I'm also now using extensively things like drones to be able to monitor physical infrastructure. Again, files, objects, databases, all these different sources of information. You need to have that common architecture to be able to build these centralized services in a cloud-based service. Okay, so with that, Daniel, I will turn it over to you and you can describe a little bit more about what do we have to offer.
Thank you, Russell. Yeah, it's all about unlocking siloed data, moving everything to the cloud, and being able to leverage all the tools that we have available in AWS cloud today. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship between AWS and NetApp. NetApp was founded in 1992. It is an industry-leading storage provider, and it powers approximately 30% of the NAS deployments in the world. And like Russell mentioned, ONTAP is NetApp's data management software that supports a wide range of features. And cloud storage is a key component of NetApp's strategy. And we've been collaborating since 2012, working together to integrate NetApp's data management solutions into AWS cloud infrastructure. And our first release of ONTAP on AWS was called Cloud Volumes ONTAP CVO. It was more like a self-managed solution. But in 2021, AWS announced what we call first-class service called FSx for NetApp ONTAP. So this new storage service combines the trusted ONTAP features with our simplicity and scalability. And it includes obviously multi-protocol support, snapshot cloning, replication, and all the storage efficiencies that are available in ONTAP. It's more like a like-for-like feature. And on top of that, it provides AWS flexibility with a pay-as-you-go model, easy spin up and spin down capabilities, one-click deployment, and an elastic capacity pool that eliminates the need for provisioning. So this service today is trusted by multiple companies in the energy segment because it's not only because it's a robust data management capabilities, but also because NetApp has an extensive footprint of storage in the energy industry, and engineers in the energy industry have been using NetApp for years now. So Russell, if you can move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so like I said, FSxN, that's how we call FSx for NetApp ONTAP, short name, is a fully managed cloud service that supports NetApp's data management features and APIs. It supports its storage efficiency functions like compression, dedupe, data tiering, thin provisioning, along with protections like SnapMirror and SnapVault. And these capabilities provide an efficient solution for migrating or extending these deployments to the cloud. So it's like same way to manage your data all the time, and you're only extending that to a cloud infrastructure. So next slide, please, Russ. Let's talk a little bit about some features. Right, when we talk about fully managed, FSxN is fully managed service. It provides reliable, scalable, performant, and feature-rich file storage built on ONTAP. And being fully managed means that customers won't have to be concerned about what version of firmware they're running, what type of underneath hardware they're running. Everything is based on AWS provided service, so we do that for you. It delivers familiar features, performance, capability of NetApp, and combine the agility, scalability, simplicity of a fully managed service. So you can manage FSx ONTAP through AWS console, through APIs, command line interface, as well as through BlueXP and Cloud Insights, another set of tools from NetApp. To create a file system is pretty straightforward. Just a few clicks in the console to determine capacity, the performance that you want, some AWS settings like VPC and security groups, and then it will give you a fully managed file share without the need to set up your own compute, your own EBS storage, point looms, and then procure your licenses separately. So that is a lot of advantage. In terms of enterprise features, ONTAP support a ton of enterprise features. You can migrate, you can backup or burst your Windows, Linux file-based applications using AWS without changing anything in your code or how you manage the data. The service offers a highly available multi-AZ deployment, supporting snapshots, cross-region replication through SnapMirror, caching through FlexCache, cloning, and a fully managed backup solution. In terms of price and performance, we have high performance SSD storage, and we have intelligent tiering to lower cost elastic storage to eliminate the need of provision capacity. So it's basically a limited scalability, allowing you to reduce storage costs without actually impacting any performance. It provides scalable file system, cost optimization benefits, dedupe compression, thin provisioning, and it's broadly accessible from Linux, from Mac OS, from Windows, from both on-premise or in AWS, and that includes services like EC2, EKS, Workspaces, AppStream, and VMware Cloud. And as a native AWS service, FSxN also integrates with CloudFormation, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and the identity and access management to automate and monitor all the workflows that you have. And lastly, FSxN ensures security and compliance that most of the enterprise companies expect. It offers a fully end-to-end encryption, antivirus integration, file access auditing, which includes third-party provider integration. We have many and multiple out there. Active Directory-based authentication, and several other industry standard compliance, including ISO, PCI, SOC, and HIPAA. So that covers a little bit about the benefits, and I will ask you to move to the next slide. All right, so during reInvent last year in November, we announced the scale-out version of FSxN storage services, and we increased that number of controllers from 1 pair of controllers to 6 pair of controllers. And this past Monday, March 4th, 2024, we expanded the scale-out capabilities to 12 pairs. So we have now 24 controllers per file system. And with this latest update, we are offering now 12 times the original read and write throughput, which is up to 72 gig. We are offering 12 times more IOPS. And lastly, this service is not available in all AWS regions just yet. But if you go to US East, US West, Europe and Ireland, and APAC and Sydney, the services is already available there, so you can deploy it. And then the next slide, I believe that's my last slide. Yeah, so a few call to actions. That's what we planned. We'd like to discuss, obviously, next steps with everybody that is joining this webinar to ensure that we are landing the right approach, services, and the partners for your specific business objectives. So our request today is for you to leverage your system integrator GSIs that you're currently working with. And this type of engagements, they typically require GSIs, which will assist us in defining next steps, right, Russ? And then they typically involve 4 key phases, which is essentially identification of business outcomes, involvement of the key stakeholders, inclusion of all your business transformation partners, and finally, kick off a proof of concept to implement that feature and prove it in the cloud. So that's it. Russ, I don't know if you have final comments before we jump to the Q&A session.
No, I think you kind of outlined what the next steps are. I really do believe this is a multi-way partnership. I mean, that is very important. You take a look at a lot of the customers, they were fairly comfortable, I think, in a lot of their environments, and then it's really a lot of this, I think the importance of cloud connectivity, cloud is kind of coming into this part of the market segment, I think, very aggressively. These new forms of advanced analytics. Transformation really hasn't been a big thing up until the past several years. So this is kind of where now kind of the awareness of these type of services. What does it really mean? What kind of changes could be involved to a customer? But again, as you've highlighted, I think very clearly, is that the systems integrators and the GSI partners, I think, are going to play an integral role in around the identification of what are those business values and getting everybody really engaged in the remaining parts of this transformation. Again, any form of manufacturing, you're never done. There's always ways you can improve, throughput, health and safety, it could be profitability, connected supply chain. There's always something. And I think this kind of an architecture, when we're looking where cloud can really advance this flexibility, this scalability on demand, the cost-effective nature of where the cloud is going. And now actually some of the really advanced safety and security capabilities that are inherent within cloud, I think becomes part of everybody's conversation, everybody's part of their journey.
That's true. Yeah, I agree. We're seeing, this convergence between OT and IT. There's a lot of risks involved in that, but there's also a lot of advantages in, being able to replicate, integrate all your data in a single data lake and extract informations, and being able to leverage services like, the recent announced Bedrock service, for example, for Gen AI. It's a great capability that we offer, and it's definitely something that is, differentiate in AWS cloud. So let's see if we have any questions from the audience.
Hey Russ, Daniel, I've got a question that came in. How are you load balancing sensor data at the edge? Would it be better to do some initial data processing at the edge compute device as the first of several layers of data analytics, hence sending less but more intelligent data to the cloud data lake?
So I can take that one. So I think the answer is still yes. I think in a lot of the cases, when you look at the vast volumes of IoT sensor data that is being generated, that first pass analytic, there's always going to be, I kind of look at it as being the fast loop process, the things that I'm doing almost like on a per millisecond basis, right on the device itself. I think there's still kind of that, pre-processing that should happen there. Going into maybe a localized data historian, there's going to be a big difference between moving that raw sensor information across your bandwidth to cloud versus initially taking that centralization and that pre-processing of the data into a local historian, and then using the ONTAP capabilities to replicate a database, because you've already benefited from that centralization, that first data compression compaction that the historian itself is doing. And now if I'm replicating the blocks which have changed, not all of the data, all that raw sensor data, but now just the parts of the database which have physically changed, there is massive efficiency gains that happen across the usage of your external bandwidth to connections to cloud if you're deploying some type of a pre-processing. So recommendation would be, yes, still carry on with that pre-processing.
Let me complement that. So we don't believe that cloud will completely replace the need for some sort of ONTAP, on-premise deployments, right? There are still locations where network infrastructure is a challenge, and the equipments they need, sub-millisecond response from some sort of a system that controls it, like temperature, a system that controls temperature from a pump, for example, or something like that. So yes, there still be on-premise equipments collecting and pre-processing that data, but the advantage is when you start to replicate that data to the cloud, you start to find patterns. For example, there are certain type of equipment that behaves in a way that, if you identify that 2 or 3 weeks before, you are preventing it to break. So you're sending maintenance before the equipment fails, saving you money and time. So that's the value that you can extract from that data that is being replicated from, remote locations, add locations to core to the cloud.
Because chances are you're going to be using that same type of equipment in multiple locations. That same manufacturer provided pump or compressor. Can we start sharing knowledge and best practices for doing that predictive maintenance across the entire enterprise and not just localized to one site? So again, centralized cloud service makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Is there other questions?
Yeah, there is, Russ, Daniel, there is another question related to slide number 5. You mentioned maturity level. Have you defined already an assessment program to confirm where my company is located, exactly its positions between step number 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, or is this usually performed by an integrator? Thanks.
So there certainly are standardized processes for doing that self-assessment. Quite often is being conducted with your GSI partner, but it is kind of where I am. It's more of an awareness, like where I am, where can I benefit. But I think honestly the most important part is, what are those business objectives? What is the next thing you're trying to improve? Are you trying to, minimize, disruptive, non-productive downtime? Are you trying to optimize and minimize your spare parts inventory? Are you trying to get into that next level of efficiency? So understanding where you are on that maturity curve, I think, gives you then insights into, well, what other kind of business outcomes could you improve upon? But it's really around making the investment around, how do I improve my business? So I always kind of tend to concentrate on that part of it, but a self-assessment as to where you are presently can give you some insights.
Yeah, in energy industry, it's challenging industry. So as you evolve in that maturity level, you kind of optimize all your research. And today it's everything about optimization, right? We can't anticipate, geopolitical problems around the world. So we don't know. We control what we control. And if we can leverage that data and create this environment where we can predict, we can adapt while we're running operations, that will be, the perfect state. That's the last level. It's important to give the first step. And the first step is basically unlock the power of the data. So remove the silos. The energy industry is known by typically having like a problem, a solution, another problem, another solution, another problem, another solution. So what we want to do here is integrate all those solutions into a single place where you can extract value from the data.
I think too is there's some other key benefits from that centralized approach, because I mean, those of us who have lived in the oil and gas industry for a number of years have seen this, it's a boom cycle, it's a bust cycle, it's a boom cycle, it's a bust cycle. And having that concept, or I've made these big capital investments in localized on-prem infrastructure, only to be found by, oh, now we have another global turndown. These are kind of situations where I don't really want to be investing in a lot more capital, infrastructure, especially IT. And this is the type of thing where, again, if I can just use that flexibility and the extensibility that cloud offers, it really has some major advantages moving forward, because we've all lived these cycles.
All right, got a couple more for you. In the frame of sustainability, as you mentioned in slide 8, can we optimize the energy consumption and gather all the inputs for CSR ESG purposes?
Yes, I mean, obviously, I think everybody in the industry now has a sustainability objective. We have been working with several different analytics companies now that really are specializing in energy efficiency. So that digital twin, the more sophisticated I can make, I guess the more reliable I can make that digital twin of an individual pump or compressor, but now we're getting into full complex systems, maybe my entire plant. I start looking at playing what if scenarios. And the things that are wonderful about these advanced digital twins is the fact that I can try different types of maintenance techniques. I can experiment with different operation parameters. And therefore I can really work towards tuning the energy efficiencies and what to do in different scenarios. I'm seeing a lot more people using cloud, especially to be able to play this. It's kind of almost like a developer type of an environment. It's a what if scenario. If I have that complexity and sophistication of my digital twin in the cloud, I can sit there and experiment. What if I do this? What if I do that? And a lot of the goals and the objectives that I'm seeing customers using now, it's around concepts of sustainability. Can I make it more energy efficient? What if I run the pumps at like 95%? What if I do this? What if I try that? And then you just see, well, what happens? I don't have to do it with my physical environment, because I can rely on the accuracy of my digital twin.
Just want to mention also that Amazon is the world's largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy for the 4th year in a row. So when you move stuff to the cloud, we use clean energy in a lot of deployments, and we have very aggressive goals to be carbon neutral by 2 or 3 years before every other company. They aim 2030 and 2050, and I believe we are in something around 2027 or something like that. So yeah, so it's a great thing. We are always talking about that with customers, and that's a great way. So when you eliminate over provisioning, you're definitely in the right way to achieve your ESG goals.
And I would say too is that these new advanced analytics, I mean, they are data hungry, but they're also very then compute intensive. And if I'm playing these what if scenarios around whether it's sustainability or energy efficiency, if I'm running hundreds or thousands of realizations, that can actually be a fairly large energy consuming thing. By leveraging, the green power utilization that AWS uses in cloud, that can also help offset. So I'm seeing more and more now with inside of RFPs and RFIs, a lot of the very first requirements that are showing up is not necessarily around performance and speeds, but it's around, well, help me map out my current state, of my, carbon footprint, and then tell me what my, carbon offsets will be by using cloud-based services. So that sustainability factors very, very heavily into a lot of decisions these days.
Thank you. There is a last question. How to start the journey you are presenting on the last slide, this slide? By contacting you, or how can we start the approach and the call to action?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. So it certainly can either go through Daniel or myself, I mean, going through AWS or go through NetApp. But I think also what ends up is being a very, very good, way forward is you're probably already working with your systems integrator, your GSI partner. A lot of what we're trying to do in this awareness session, like even with today, is making sure that your transformation partners, the people you rely on to maintain your infrastructure, help you through any type of a transformation, are keenly aware of what AWS and NetApp actually have to offer. How these kind of services and this cloud connectivity, this centralization of services and lifting and shifting of on-premise environment into cloud can really be factored in. So I think whether you approach your your AWS cloud account manager, whether you go through your NetApp, but more importantly, I think these days is going through your GSI systems integrator partner and saying, these are my business objectives. How am I going to achieve them? When do we get started? How do I get all the stakeholders engaged? I think that is the more natural path forward. I don't know if you have any other comments, Daniel.
No, that's it. GSIs are the answer, but obviously, if you don't have any GSI currently working with you, you can reach out to me or to Russell, and we can definitely engage, the best option for you based on your needs.
Thank you both. There is no more questions so far.
Okay, so I guess with that, thank you very much all for your time and attention. Like I say, if there's any questions as a follow-up, please reach out to Daniel, to myself, or to your GSI partner. But again, thank you very much for your time and attention today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.